Alright, so today we're going to be checking out episode 16. I've taken a couple of days to basically handle some stuff that I haven't been able to handle and to unwind a little bit. If you guys don't know, if I haven't said, if you haven't talked to you in Discord, I've taken vacation from work for a few days just to unwind just a little bit. And yesterday I came home from work, took a breather. Today I took care of a whole bunch of stuff in town, and here I am now. Tomorrow, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm pretty sure I've got some stuff lined up that I got to take care of. But yeah, it feels good to be able to sit down and relax for a change. But we're gonna go ahead and start checking out episode 16. Stop yelling at me. I'm coming to it. Jesus! Anyhow, let's go.
Master Ayla had never allowed herself to go this far. She swung to the left, saber drawing streaking lines of blue in the air. The luminous weapon took the lives of 3 men, melting straight through the whirring chainsword the first of them raised in defense. His face was a mask of frenzy and disbelief as he was neatly bisected despite the integrity of his parry. The bladed chain of the weapon went whipping out wildly, cutting the man's face and red cap in half, while Ayla smoothly spun to the left, evading the bits that came flying out at her. She twisted in the air, carried farther than was natural on winds pulled into reality by the power of the Force, and landed in a neat crouch nearby, sweeping her saber back to the right in the process, taking the heads of 2 more Imperial soldiers as she landed. The Jedi Master thrust her free hand out, pushing the headless bodies forward into a cluster of nearby soldiers who were preparing to volley fire into her. They only managed a few sloppy shots before the corpses landed nearby, the glowing blue coils of their guns flaring to life in a horrible display of screaming and death. Composed of blue fire and terrible force, the Imperial soldiers were eradicated by their own unstable weapons, though, oddly, the guns themselves seemed more or less intact afterwards. Ayla had rarely fought with this much lethal skill, and never against living opponents. Only in combat with droids did she do what she was doing now, allowing violence, passionless and pure, to flow through her. She took every opening, rode every lethal current which came to her, and struck at every foe with the intention to kill. What conscious thought she maintained was focused almost entirely on making sure she did not commit to anything too suicidal, holding herself back from accidentally performing any acts so lethal they would take her life as well as the lives of her enemies. This could be hard for her to do, as it had been in the past, and yet, frankly, it wasn't. Not there, not then. Everything was in sync within her, and Ayla felt honed like never before, subsumed by neither compassion nor hatred, as she remembered the teachings of her own master and embraced the recklessness which had enabled him to learn Vapad. Though she would not manage to match his own lethal skill on just this rush alone, she was certainly closer than she ever had been. The knowledge was not comforting. All around her was the massive main avenue, her advancing army grinding its way forward at her back, the Imperial menace attempting to impede them at her front. They were desperately trying to halt or slow her forces by any means, forming pockets and bulwarks and using all manner of varied weapons and tactics. Most of these defenses and attempts were pulverized by her artillery support, and when they finally had the good sense to hide in the shadows of the spires, the imps were handed off to her elite vanguard,
Imps.
and, of course, the Jedi Master herself. At this rate, they would come within sight of the Imperial Temple in little over 12 minutes, perhaps sooner if nothing unexpected reared itself up before her advance. Ayla was not happy nor sad about her progress. She was simply satisfied. The Imperials had to be stopped, and they were being stopped. General, Sith Trio hold up dead ahead. They've already incinerated Auric's squad. Commander Husk and what's left of his men are either being evac'd or ID'd as we speak. I'm holding my squad back for now, scouting for a less lethal approach to the targets. Ayla's alien brain brought the name of the commander to her lips without so much as a conscious twitch, easily able to remember every last one of the clones under her command. Good thinking, Captain Graves. Keep out of their reach until I get there. I'll clear them out myself. She radioed back through the comm pin she had placed in her vest. Already, Ayla was orienting, reaching out with her senses and quickly locating the Imperial force wielders which Graves had indicated. They bent the Force in ways she had never conceived of, making the very fabric of it warp and moan in odd, destructive forms. She followed that foreboding wail, feet kicking with heightened speed and strength as she crossed the battlefield like a speeder. Are you sure you don't want us to cover your approach, General? We can be next to you in seconds if you ping us. Graves sent back. Ayla allowed herself a grim smirk. These will be the 5th, 6th, and 7th Imperial Sith I killed today, Captain.
That's kind of odd for her to refer to them as Sith. But I'm guessing they wouldn't understand, just the same as the Imperials wouldn't understand. The Imperials would consider them Psychers. But, yeah. I'm guessing that she was trained. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing she was trained by Mace Windu, because Vopa is something that he did, and it basically enhances. It basically feeds off aggression as an offensive style. I don't know.
I think I figured them out.
Against,
she said.
Yeah.
Roger that, General. We'll be on standby to advance after you're done. Oh, and General, said Captain Graves. Yes, Captain. Don't be a stranger. You Jedi can't always pick up all the slack, and we commandos make house calls. Graves said, some humor forcing itself through his normally grim demeanor. Ayla smiled somewhat. She knew that his effort was the direct result of her own lack of humor, her own grimness. On Graves, it was almost endearing, especially when one got to know him. On Ayla, it was a sign that something was wrong, very wrong. She made it a point to seem a little less absorbed in her task, to avoid affecting the morale of her troops. Noted, Graves. Stay ready to cover me if I call, she said. The Jedi leapt the remains of a crashed Imperial gunship, landing atop its nearly skyward pointing tail, and from there, seeing the 3 Graves had spoken of. Bent and ravaged by their bizarre techniques, all but one of the 3 were blinded, and wore blood-streaked rags over their empty sockets. Chains rattled and clinked from where they hung, affixed cruelly to hand and ankle, yet hanging free. They were all bald and emaciated, so thin and hairless as to seem sexless, leaving Ayla utterly uncertain as to whether she faced a coven of robed crones or a trio of 3 wailing male sorcerers. Even their voices were distorted, rising and falling in pitch as they cast their power out in reckless waves of fiery destruction. The 3 held aloft staves which ended in torch-like heads, objects of focus for their flames. All around them, in wide cones and arches, were the sprawled, burned remains of hundreds of the vanguard forces. The sight of the scorched dead reminded her of her purpose, and the Jedi Master breathed out the emotions building within her, becoming as cool as the color of her skin as she honed herself for battle once more. The very act of preparation seemed to draw the attention of all 3 of the Imperial force wielders, and they raised their staves into the air, screaming out wordless chants of hell and flame. In response, the torches on the ends of their focus staves flared bright. Ayla could feel the wave of their intentions reach her far before any actual heat or flames were birthed into reality. The Jedi's body tensed, coiling as she breathed the force into her muscles and joints, strengthening and propelling them to enable her speed to defy all logic. It was by this speed that she evaded the balls of flame which exploded in her wake, not thrown, but spontaneously generated into existence in places she had been only moments before. She could feel them reaching out for her with their senses, fumbling to catch the cartwheeling form of the Jedi Master as she leapt and evaded another explosion, and then another, drawing nearer and nearer as she approached in an unpredictable zigzag. One reached out with a gnarled, filthy hand, clutching at the air as if to grasp something from on high, while another bent low, pressing their forehead against the steel ground, appearing to enter a state of supplication or prayer. Ayla felt the ground begin to heat beneath her feet as the air started to hum, as if she had just entered into the mouth of a massive microwave. Spotting the wreckage of a nearby chimera and the impact crater of a massive shell which had left a deep hole in the avenue, Ayla acted without thought or planning, her movements and choices a flow of precognitive judgments made more by the Force than by her own thinking mind. She rode those currents, but barely controlled them. Extending her hand, she ran on, heading towards the APC, seeing that its back-facing troop hatch was wide open and facing her. She sprinted hard towards it, no longer angling for the Imperials, feeling small blisters and burns already beginning to form across her body, the disfigured touch of their technique bleeding into reality. Ayla had only seconds more, leaping the crater instead of taking cover within it, her back now to the three as she sunk all her effort into this final plan. Exertion played plainly across the face of the Jedi Master as she pulled her extended hand back towards her chest, closing it into a fist as she did. The chimera lurched and then flew forward, suddenly pulled free of its own wreckage as if yanked by thousands of elastic ropes. She leapt up, spinning around to face the sorcerers once more as the open maw of the chimera came flying after her, the Jedi pulling in her arms and legs just as it snatched her out from the air. The arcing trajectory of the flying vehicle husk guided the wreck straight towards her three opponents. But she was hardly done, and neither were they. Maws of flame opened above and below the chimera, dousing it in fire from both directions as it hurtled closer to the three. The two Imperial Force wielders who had been attacking focused, moving their upward and downward facing columns of flames at pace with the nearing form of the burning chimera. But even they could sense that they would not manage to destroy it that way, despite being wholly focused on the flying vehicle. This was where the third stepped in, mumbling and babbling obscene words of fire, tongue literally alight. The chained Imperial cupped hands around their burning mouth, and as the chimera seemed to be about to fly into and crush the three of them, the third, sighted Imperial screamed, issuing forth much more than sound with the effort. A wide jet of superheated warp matter blew out of their mouth in an intense cone of thermal obliteration. The chimera was caught in its entirety, and where it had managed to retain most of its shape and structure under the bathing torrents of flame prior, its armor was revealed to be worthless against the new attack. Its body was warped, utterly shredded into glowing slag by the Melta-style blast of heat which the Imperial was screaming into existence. The chimera's momentum was sapped by the blast almost instantly, and it landed heavily, leaving a glowing smear of ceramite and metal as it came to a grinding halt, now less than a quarter of its original size. It was so destroyed, in fact, that none of the three Imperials had been able to see or define the perfectly cut circular hole in the away-facing position of the chimera, which had been made there by Master Ayla almost the instant she had entered the chimera proper, having always intended it as a distraction and little else. The two sorcerers who had failed to kill her smiled and laid their hands appreciatively upon the back of the third, who was busy rubbing their burnt lips and spitting out molten fragments of their own teeth. The third smiled in spite of the pain, having no idea that Ayla had not perished within the craft, but had instead cut her way out of the flying APC just as it had passed over the deep crater she had considered using for cover. They discovered this a second or so later when Ayla's saber burst from the ground beneath them, skewering and slicing away their feet as it spun.
Nice.
The three mutilated force wielders were blown away as she used the force to push the circle of steel above her directly up and out, jumping up a moment later herself. Around Ayla lay the writhing, cursing forms of the three, and she wasted no time, jumping into the first and decapitating the Imperial without mercy. She did the same to the second, and intended to do the same to the third, but once more, the sighted third found the strength to act, glaring through bloodshot eyes as power filled them completely, opening a mouth full of flattened, burnt teeth. The sorcerer repeated the same technique which had been used to destroy the Chimera, firing it directly into her. It was instant death, or rather, it would have been. But Ayla had figured them out, found their weakness, and had no shame in exploiting it fully. These Imperial force wielders hated and feared the very force which they used, which flowed through them. She was hesitant to call them Sith, because even the Sith, hateful as they were, did not treat the Force as a serpent, a venomous beast which they sought to use whilst avoiding its fangs themselves.
True.
Yes, their techniques were powerful indeed, with a level of brute application Ayla had never seen and could not replicate. But she danced and moved with the Force, making it and herself as one, and did not fear it or hate it as they did. Her grasp of this power was pure, trained, and unclouded, and so, for her, it was only a matter of effort to do what she did next. Reaching down with the Force, Ayla found her opponent, specifically the grip they had on the fabric of the Force, and with a gentleness which bordered on kindness, seized the metaphorical wrist of the sorcerer attempting to exert their influence, and broke it. It was like breaking straw, and in place of burning gouts of superheated death, the sorcerer beneath her, who was glaring death into her, burped up a shallow draft of warm air and died less than a second later as Ayla neatly snipped off their head. Her rebuke had been trained to be used against the likes of Ventress and Savage, Sith acolytes who embraced the Force and the dark side of it wholly. Compared to that level of dedication, this act was easy, and several times she had sensed a strange elation from the Imperial she was killing, as if they were grateful to have died, without being fully connected to the Force. The revelation reminded her in no uncertain terms that the perversions and distortions of this empire were truly without end. Ayla was about to call her troopers forward when, without warning, she sensed something and froze. It was just a subtle, soft brush against her senses, a tickle, perhaps even an illusion.
Okay.
But even so, it had for a brief moment turned her blood to ice. It had been the dark side, pure, unrestrained, and black as the stretch between voids. Had it been an illusion? She was not sure, but not being sure was not good enough to ignore it. She signaled the vanguard forward, and then jumped back into the hole she had made, crouching as she found herself once more within the smoking maintenance crawl spaces of the colossal roadway. She used the Force to filter the air and moved swiftly, feet light as she crouched and ran at once. The Jedi moved back towards the crater she had used to...
I got a feeling she sensed something, but I'm not going to say what I think she sensed, considering the nature of the thing that she was fighting. I view it as unlikely, but if it happens in this universe, it's going to be bad.
To reach these tunnels, and halfway to the breach, she
There's
found
a reason
hatch
that the
led
Imperials
further down.
fear the power they
With
use.
a flick of her wrist, she forced it open and jumped through, eschewing the orange ladder left there for her descent. Beneath were some more maintenance access points, and then another hatch which led down into the first set of sub-roads beneath the main avenue, which were massive in their own right. The fighting was also occurring down here, though with less vehicles from both sides. She ignored the battle, moving around the combatants as she made her way lower and lower, following the memory of the sense, the echo it left in her, an echo she was more and more certain had been real and not imagined. She had studied the maps of her approach extensively, and her memory was excellent, so it was not long before she began to figure out where this presence had lingered. Security Center Delta Y, one of the many security monitoring rooms which had been used by the civilian government's law enforcement and emergency services before the invasion. She had suspected most would be abandoned by now, though it made sense that the enemy would select one as a command and control position. If they managed to slice their way past the city's security networks and defenses, then they'd have access to countless cameras and sensor devices scattered all across the ongoing battle. The realization only fueled her drive further. Whatever was being done there, it needed to be stopped. She reached the center entrance and found the doors locked and unresponsive. It was no matter. Her lightsaber granted her the access she lacked, and soon she was inside the small, vaguely dome-like security room. Her eyes, accustomed to the twilight of her homeworld, pierced the dimness with ease, and she saw standing before her 3 figures. But these 3 were not as the others had been, not at all. One was a many-limbed droid man, robed in red, its attention focused solely on a nearby console it seemed to be interfacing with. Not far was another robed form, though this one was hunched and contorted, clearly badly malformed beneath its tattered vestments of thick, brown sackcloth.
Servitor.
And, standing before the 2 of them, facing away from her, was the tallest and most imposing of the trio. The robe which sheathed this figure was stark black and luxuriously thick. Golden pins, medals, and chains coated its shoulders and sleeves, and the straight-backed posture of its wearer was completely at odds with the uncanny and crooked stances of the other 2. Ayla raised her saber. "Halt! This is your one chance. Surrender now, drop your weapons, or you will all die," she said. The Jedi Master was fully prepared for them to attack her, prepared to dodge back outside the room, prepared to cut her way back in from a different direction. What she was not prepared for was them, all of them, ignoring her utterly. She took another step forward. "Now," she insisted. "I think she is serious."
Oh boy.
"Master," said the hunched figure, its voice a gravelly cackle. It crawled a little closer, revealing its mangled arms and hands as it used them, ape-like, to approach. The skin all across its arms was coated in tattoos and scarred symbols, the sight of which made Ayla sick for no discernible reason.
Oh no.
Bones jutted like small horns or thorns from around its fingers and knuckles,
No.
and it bled from them, though no blood actually dripped off onto the floor, clinging unnaturally to the skin.
Oh, this is bad.
She moved her saber to face it, but found no need to halt it. That was done by the upraised hand of the central figure, the motion revealing the being's hand and little else. Pale, flawless skin bore the many intricate and ornate rings of the Imperial's long-fingered thin hand. Yet despite their luster and quality, it was the black talon-like nails that tipped each digit which drew eyes the most. Ayla shivered at the sight, but held fast as the robed Imperial began to turn around to face her, moving slowly, deliberately. So far as she could tell, none but the droid men were armed, and that red-robed abomination seemed fully occupied by whatever its task was. In spite of this, Ayla could not shake a deep sense of menace which was flooding into the room like a thickening miasma of toxic gas.
No.
"You will do nothing," said the turning man. "She and I will reckon. She and I alone." Ayla had had enough. She thrust her hand forward, issuing forth a column of the Force. The air thrummed with the energy of her attack, the concussive wave rolling out from her and colliding with the room and everything inside it. Walls shook, consoles exploded and broke, and the few windows that looked out onto the road burst and blew out. Ayla did not drop her guard for even a moment, fully expecting retaliation, but being surprised twice more instead. No retaliation came, which was unexpected. Yet what she found even more shocking was the state of her targets. The room looked nearly destroyed, save for everything near the three Imperials. Looking at the lines of dust on the floor, she could spot with her keen eyes the spherical border of protection which had blunted her own attack, and judged that the central figure among the three was the source. Another Force wielder. As the dust and detritus cleared out of the air, the Jedi Master was able to see that her push had not been entirely negated, succeeding in stirring and dropping the hood of her new opponent. The sight drew the breath out of her with an audible gasp. Was this man supposed to be human? His face was long, almost snouted, with a grin filled with filed, shark-like teeth, and rows of them at that. His eyes were pure black, like a doll's eyes, and his head was utterly hairless, revealing slightly pointed ears and a wide, too smooth scalp.
Slaanesh or Khorne. One of the two.
And there was something more as well, a dark, pervading air of menace which was pouring out from the man like a gushing font.
Probably Zinch.
He finished turning, grinning his filed teeth at her. She wasted little time, not even waiting for the man to complete his deliberate turn, dashing forward, blue blade leading the way. The creature in the black robe suddenly picked up speed, becoming a blur as he broke and bent the rules of time and space, reaching into the confines of his void-shaded robes and drawing forth a glimmering black rapier. Sparks shone along the umbral steel of the obsidian blade like stars in night's tapestry, glowing bright as it repelled Ayla's attacks, forcing her...
For Star Wars people that are watching this alongside me for the first time, if you don't know what's going on, I will explain it. This is something whenever a Star Wars versus 40k argument happens or discussion happens, you have to dismiss one thing out of the Warhammer 40k universe entirely, because no matter how strong the Space Marines are, no matter how many, no matter any world-killing weapons, nothing like that, none of that matters, because the thing that would I always talk about scenarios. If the Empire invaded 40k, the first thing that would happen before anything else happened, I don't even know if they make it to the first engagement, before the Empire would start to suffer casualties brought on by the nature of the warp, aka the Force, in the Warhammer world. Now, this guy, I was hoping, I did not know exactly if it was going to happen or not, but I was wondering how it was going to be handled. I am fully on board with the idea right now that this guy is tainted by chaos. If that's the case, they've been talking about the suckers being scared of using their power. This is the reason why. And I got a feeling I'm about to see some bad stuff.
Back with a surprising amount of strength as the Imperial thing drove in with its own offensive. The shadows in the room danced, backlighting flares of blue and white light as the two blades clashed and slid. Ayla spun, piercing through the future with sight beyond sight, becoming a blur of motion and grace. The Imperial creature matched her grace with a lethal waltz of his own, black robes trailing as the thin, deadly edge and point of his power sword darted and swiped for her. Several times, the Jedi had been sure she had finally caught him in a mortal exchange, only to find herself slowed or even sped up, fouling her timing and enabling her opponent to fight on.
Now this is going to be this is a baseline human versus a Jedi Master, and I'm not surprised. This is a baseline human corrupted by chaos versus a Jedi, and I'm not surprised by what's going on right now. Chaos is it's ugly. It's nasty. Here we go.
She felt her teeth pressing against each other in growing frustration, warring to keep balance within herself. This man, this thing, was different from the other Force wielders that the Imperials had been using. Perhaps a master of their orders, whatever form that took in their twisted empire. However the case may be, the beastly man before her was no novice when it came to close combat, and his method of using the Force was disturbingly novel and indirect. Instead of increasing his direct strength and speed, he was corrupting time and space to achieve similar ends. The tactic left Ayla off balance and struggling to keep up, feet backtracking as the Imperial advanced, forcing her cleanly out of the cramped room, back through the short hallway that led to it, and into the wide, spacious area of the abandoned transit center. "Enough!" she yelled. The Jedi Master exhaled a powerful 360-degree wave of raw force, managing to shove the dueling Imperial back. She then reached towards him with her free hand and did as she had done before, touching upon the Imperial with the Force itself and seeking the multitude of cracks and flaws she knew would be there. No matter how brave, disciplined, ambitious, or faithful, one could not wield the Force with true mastery while fearing it like these Imperials did. Ayla found her target easily enough and once more took the Imperial by the metaphorical wrist and twisted. But those same flaws, those which had been present to each Imperial servant up to this point, were not present here. His grip held steady, firm, and once more he gave her that shark-toothed grin as he realized what she was attempting. Before she could recover from the surprise of her failure, he seized her as she had him, though instead of attempting to break her grip on the Force, he did something altogether different. Like the sudden thrust of an unexpected lance, he pierced her mental defenses, if only briefly, and touched her mind to his own. Ayla moved to her own protection immediately. She was no stranger to mental trials or mind warfare. But she could not have prepared herself for what he assailed her with. Images, thoughts, sensations. Unlike every time before, this mental attack was not intended to rend her thoughts, steal her memories, or alter her perspectives or beliefs. Instead, the Imperial created a brand composed of memories, sensations, and experiences and pressed it hot and bare to the metaphorical flesh of her mind.
Wow.
He was only able to keep purchase on her for seconds, almost less, but even that much time had been enough. Ayla's wide eyes reflected the trauma of her mind's vision. She had seen billions, untold billions, marching in forlorn trails, each step dragging screaming minds closer to their deaths. She had watched the sky fill with teeth, the entire expanse of space becoming stuffed to bursting with ravenous mouths and pincers and worse. She had seen the horns and eyes of monsters which parodied existence itself, had felt the tongues of fire that issued from their lying words. Death and war and promise and pain. A galaxy ruled by the dead, the violent, the scheming, and the mindlessly obsessed. She watched worlds burn and burn and burn without end. A death 1,000 years long, dragged slowly out. She tasted the ashes, ashes born from ashes. And in the last instance, she could even hear it. The laughter. The horrible laughter.
Wow.
When she finally found herself orienting back on reality, the Jedi realized that she had fallen to her knees, and that her saber had dropped from her hand and rolled to the feet of the grinning, monstrous thing that faced her. Her fingers were trembling, clutching at her tunic vest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart thumping hard and uncontrolled in her chest. She took a deep breath, but found herself unable to calm the racing of her heart. She attempted to rise, but found she lacked the strength to do so. Ayla looked up with unbelieving eyes at the monster who now stood over her, blade raised, foot trapping her weapon beneath it. "What are you?" she breathed. The Imperial smiled even more widely, his grotesque teeth appearing to grow larger as his thin lips withdrew even more. He extended his own free hand towards her, and Ayla shuddered, gasping as a harsh pressure suddenly pushed in on her from all directions, holding her perfectly in place and rendering her utterly immobile. Once he seemed satisfied with his psychic bindings, the creature lowered his black rapier, and the unnatural blur which had surrounded him during the fight fell away. She could observe him more clearly now, seeing that the bright golden smudges on his robes had not been the results of merely blurred metals and pins, but also the distortion of a large golden threaded symbol which predominated the front of his robes. An enormous, stylized eye. The Imperial took a shallow bow, splaying his arms in an open, mocking gesture.
"I am the eye that watches from the long shadows,"
said the man-creature, black eyes glinting.
"I am the hand which commits the sins saints dare not consider. I am the mouth which questions silently for those answers which must not be known. I am the judgment of the righteous and the warden of the grey. I am an agent of the Emperor's most holy and devout Inquisition. And I see that despite our legend and reputation, I am yet again unappreciated by my allies. And by my enemies, utterly unexpected,"
he said. Ayla tried to draw in breath but could barely manage it. "What do you want?" she asked. His unpleasant smile became even more demonically composed, the intention in his eyes reading as vile in every sense.
"I was admittedly not expecting your intrusion, Jedi. I thought us rather well hidden here. That being said, your arrival is not unwelcomed. I have longed for a Jedi specimen of my own ever since arriving in this putrefied galactic disk. And now, well, now I have one,"
he said, reaching into his robe and drawing out a thin silver scalpel. Ayla shivered at the sight of the cold instrument. The metal almost seemed to shriek in her mind, as if the echoes...
Okay, she thinks he's Imperial. He is no longer Imperial no matter what he says. In fact, if literally, it's for Star Wars people that are watching this that don't know, this guy is... He may have been a member of the Holy Inquisition, but if any other Inquisitors saw him right now, they would be doing everything they possibly could to kill him right now. Just outright. They would try to kill him before they tried to kill her. Because while she is Xenos, he is something intensely worse.
Of 1,000 agonized voices were left staining its otherwise bright edge. She pulled against the restraining force around her, but found no give in it, heart racing even faster as the man took a step towards her and began to bend. Her hand tightened, squeezing again and again in futile resistance. "What do you want?" she reiterated. He grinned his monster's grin.
"A new pawn, Someone who can be my eyes, my ears, my will inside your republic. Thank you for volunteering. And don't worry, while this will involve a lot of cutting, I will be sure to steer clear of your pretty face.
He kneeled down to be at level with her, long, serpent-like tongue sliding out to lick across his lips, somehow avoiding the edges of his many teeth.
Soon I'll split open that naive, soft mind of yours. I'll tenderly, carefully scope out the things I don't want. And then, when you are in pieces, I'll stitch you back together with me inside.
She felt involuntary shudders fill her, and a desperate, wild fear begin to gnaw at the binding of her discipline. Her knuckles were white, eyes wide, almost bulging as the Inquisitor stroked the flat of his scalpel across her cheek.
He is not an Inquisitor.
Stop!
She started.
Shh. The work here is mine to do. All you need to worry about is the screaming.
Oh, God.
He cooed as he raised the scalpel, now angling it to do more than stroke. His smiling face twitched, and a degenerate eagerness spilled off the creature in waves. Ayla knew he was not trying the least bit to hide. Her heart ached in her chest, beating so hard, so fast. When was the last time she had felt fear like this?
Scream. Loud and long, Xenos. Scream to make my work go all the quicker. Tau Eldari Rackle. You will be mine.
His words were cut short by an unexpected explosion, the ceiling above them breaking open as breaching charges detonated. Debris and dust spilled in, followed closely by Aquila Squad, led by Captain Graves at the front. Heavily armed and already firing, the clones descended in a rain of blue bolts, one of which caught the Inquisitor in the chest, staggering the man back, though the bolt seemed to barely scorch his robe. A medal on his shoulder flaring to life and sheathing his entire body in a brief field of eye-achingly bright luminescence.
Personal force field.
Upstarts!
The Imperial barked, punching out with his scalpel-bearing fist. One of the many rings there flashing to life, bursting apart as it issued forth a draconic column of what seemed to be pure magma. The gout of heated material completely devoured the forms of two commandos instantly, but their attack had still managed to break his concentration, something which became clear when Ayla's lightsaber flew up from where it had been on the floor, and into the Jedi Master's waiting hands. She leapt forward in a lunging thrust which saw her connect with his lower torso. Once more, the Inquisitor was tossed away, the metal on his shoulder flaring bright and then bursting as it expended its technology, defending him from the lightsaber.
Damn Xenos!
He roared, blurring once more and narrowly avoiding two more counterstrikes, dodging blue bolts all the while. Just then, a set of wide double doors burst open, and more squads of troopers, composed of some of the vanguard, spilled in and began to open fire on the Imperial from their side of the room. The Inquisitor leapt and parried, and Ayla was slow to pursue, leaving him with time to aim his fist again, destroying another ring as it fired a thick, black beam of some kind of energy. The beam warped and crushed the wall into a small marble of dense material, but this time the commandos were ready, diving and rolling out of sight and avoiding the stream of malefic death. Meanwhile, the Inquisitor was batting aside the blue bolts fired from the vanguard, face a rictus of fury as he did. Ayla steadied herself, about to dash back in to confront the monstrous Imperial when she sensed something. The shark-toothed man was drawing in power, feasting on the force like a starved beast let loose in a pantry. She knew what came next and reached out, attempting to intercede.
Be gone from my sight!
The Inquisitor ordered, black eyes flaring white as power rolled out of him, crashing and trampling over itself as it rushed invisibly towards the troopers. Ayla managed to throw her presence between them just in time, her mental influence reaching and rushing around the billowing wave of psychic death their enemy had issued forth.
Kill this thing.
And yet, once more, Ayla found herself facing a different kind of beast than the ones she had been dealing with before. This man clearly did not fear the Force as the other Imperials did, and his techniques were not half as blunt nor comprehensible as those she had already encountered. Ayla's head snapped back, blood spurting from her nose from the psychic backlash, only barely managing to stay upright with the help of Captain Graves, who had reached her position along with the rest of his squad. "General, are you all right?" the clone asked, supporting her as she blinked her eyes back into focus. The Vanguard," Ayla muttered, holding her head in her hands. Graves looked that way and scowled beneath the visor of his helmet. Half the Vanguard had died instantly when Ayla's defenses had failed, heads bursting like struck water balloons in their helmets. The rest had little time to thank their good graces as the Inquisitor crossed the distance between himself and the remaining clone troopers.
He's not an Inquisitor.
His image a fuzzing, disorienting blur of motion. Men began to scream and die as he waded in amongst them, driving his rapier into eyes and throats and then into backs as troopers attempted to scatter. In what seemed mere moments, he had killed the entire Vanguard force, robes smoking, blood boiling on the black blade's wickedly straight length. He turned to face Ayla and her elite clones, face dark and indistinct. The commandos had already lined up their shots and barely needed their captain's command to do what they knew they needed to do. "Open fire!" Graves ordered. Aquila's squad did so, though in place of the traditional rain of blue bolts, they opted instead to fire their underslung grenade launcher attachments.
There's a good idea.
Personal favorite of this particular unit. The explosives sailed on plumes of trailing smoke, exploding on contact with the ground wherever they fell. But the Imperial Inquisitor was far from done, growling and baring bloody teeth as he swept his free hand out in front of him. Fully half the grenades which had flown for him seemed to bounce against the air, ricocheting back the way they'd come. Graves grit his teeth, drawing his blaster pistol and neatly sniping the two explosives out of the air before they could make it back. Already, the Imperial was advancing at an unnatural speed, skidding across the distance like a Jedi possessed. "Back up, now!" Graves radioed into his wrist comm. He then snapped his arm out, firing with the rest of his squad in a desperate attempt to halt the monstrous advance of the enemy. But try as they might, they simply could not pin him. He was too fast, and when he wasn't, he made their sluggish bolts even slower. The meters between them and him were vanishing by the second. Ayla, who had been leaning against his other shoulder, stepped forward and raised her blade, sweat dripping down her chin, teeth clenched as she struggled to control her nerves. They were nearly pitched from their feet then as another explosion rocked the building for a second time, this one even larger than the blasts of the breaching charges.
Okay.
The entire windowed wall of their left came away, and in swept the Aquila herself, the name of both the squad and the gunship christening the side of the painted craft. The leering orange and red face of the Starbird the gunship was named after faced the Inquisitor. The blaster cannons mounted just beneath the stylized beak also clearly honed in on his position, as were the two wing gunners and the various missile pods mounted above them. There was a pause, a moment where the Imperial monster faced down the hovering form of the Republic war machine, both instruments of death weighing the other. The Inquisitor raised the heel of his right foot, and the gunship opened fire. The Inquisitor reached out with his left hand, the green blaster bolts diverting to the left and right as if striking a reflective barrier in the air, before the whole ship quaked, trembled, and began to creak in the psychic grasp of the Imperial. The wing gunners attempted to open fire, but found their own beams similarly diverted or unable to reach. But the rain of more mundane blaster fire from the commandos, the continuing hail of blaster cannon bolts from the turrets on the gunship, and then...
We need some Space Marines in here. I'm saying that because they know what they're actually dealing with. These guys don't. They have no idea what they're dealing with right now.
Ayla's own force push met his defense at once and overcame it. He cursed, spinning away, robes scorched and smoking from every surface as he took off at a run, leaping up onto the wall of the transit center, and zigzagging his way higher and higher until he was within reach of a second-story balcony. The gunship, now free of the man's psychic vice, fired all its missile pods at once.
There you go.
The Inquisitor barely managed to leap over the salvo as the munitions whistled in, his blurred body arching in the air, landing on the balcony like a dark meteor trailing black smoke and rolling backwards onto his hands and knees, just managing to avoid the blind, scything volleys of blaster fire which chased after him. Keep it up! Smoke him out! Graves ordered, sheathing his own pistol and pulling up his blaster rifle, preparing the grenade launcher. A hand grasped the barrel of his gun and forced it down. Scowling, Graves turned in shock to find the culprit was none other than his own general. "No! Belay that order! We are retreating now!" Ayla said to the others. "But General, we must pursue!" Graves insisted. "If we pursue, we die. Let's go, commandos! That's an order!" She snapped. "General," Graves said in acknowledgement, waving his men back. The commandos maintained a lethal screen of fire as they pulled back to the open side hatches of the gunship, mounting up quickly, reading no life signs in any of the others who had come with them.
Oh my God.
Once they were all on board, Ayla grasped onto the back of Graves' armored shoulder and squeezed hard enough for him to feel it. In response, he raised his wrist comm again and spoke. "Pilot, gun it!" he ordered. "Sir!" the clone affirmed, spinning the gunship around, allowing the tail gunner to take over the covering fire before lurching forward in a rush of repulsor lift boosters. They were out of sight in seconds, even as the Inquisitor stalked up to the shattered wall, watching the lingering trails of smoke left in the wake of their retreat dissipating. He pondered as he did, and then listened as his malicious servant dragged himself to his side.
Oh my God.
I suppose you have a good reason for not intervening.
The Inquisitor growled.
Yes.
Cackled the creature who cowered in his shadow.
Your orders. You claimed the reckoning was yours.
It crooned.
Between me and her, yes. But the replicae were clearly not part of that arrangement.
The Inquisitor retorted. The malformed thing shrugged its uneven shoulders.
You could have killed them all if you had truly desired it.
It said.
Yes, at the cost of revealing myself to every psyker on the planet. You will be punished for this,
said the Imperial. His monster hissed and clawed the ground, rending furrows in the steel floor.
You are merely venting on me, Master.
Whined the thing.
You are upset that she got away.
It dared accuse. The Inquisitor merely laughed at the notion.
The Jedi can run as far and as fast as she can. There is nowhere on this world she can run to that will enable her to escape what is coming. She has only prolonged the inevitable.
Okay. So, for Star Wars people, that was not an Inquisitor. That was nowhere near an Inquisitor. It may have once been, but the person has at this point been possessed by either Zinch or Slanesh. One of the two. Korn, it would be a lot more direct. Nurgle, there would be a lot more stank on it. But, Tzeentch or Slaanesh. I'm leaning more towards Tzeentch. Now, what is Tzeentch? Tzeentch, there are 4 dark gods of chaos. Now, they're not gods as, you normally view them. The 4 gods of chaos are the most powerful beings in the warp, and they were formed from emotion. They generally go after things that are going to create more of that emotion, that emotion or that concept that created them. Tzeentch is change, progress, things of that nature. That's the reason I say that. Slaanesh would be excess, pleasure, pain, stuff like that. Both of those both of those things that this creature were doing reminded me of both, but there's no definitive towards that. There's no definitive for me, but I have a feeling if it was Slaanesh, it would be a lot more disturbing, to say the least. The concept of this thing being out and loose is not a good thing for either party. And this may cause massive problems down the road. Because the Imperials know about the 4 Chaos Gods. The Republic does not. But I did not know if it was going to be a thing in this story, if he was going to bring this up. But now that this is here, this opens a whole different can of worms. Because that means the Jedi know nothing about this. The Jedi know absolutely nothing about this. And the concept of a Jedi being possessed in this manner is scary. The reason the Imperials fear to use their abilities, their psychers, or aka Force users, fear to use the ability is because of stuff like this. This happens regularly in the Warhammer 40k universe. If a psyker is not careful, they can open themselves up to possession and corruption, which this thing evidently has, because people just don't start looking like this on a regular basis. He may have been an Inquisitor. I would guess Inquisitor for Ordo Hereticus, because he would already know of all this stuff going in, and he would be arrogant enough to believe that he isn't being corrupted. In any case, we're definitely going to learn more about him because he got away. Well, he didn't really get away. He let the other 2 get away. And I got a feeling that thing he did to her mind is going to have repercussions down the road. In any case, I am going to shut up. I'll be watching a few more of these in the next coming days. And stop trying to burn my house down. Because I don't watch this every other day. Sorry, guys. I had stuff to do. Have mercy. Anyhow, I'll catch you guys next time.